President Bola Tinubu has inaugurated the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms. The presidency said the establishment of the committee reflects its commitment to addressing challenges and bringing about transformative reforms in fiscal policy and taxation. The committee's primary objective, according to the Nigerian government, is to enhance revenue collection efficiency, ensure transparent reporting, and promote the effective utilization of tax and other revenues to boost citizens' tax morale, foster a healthy tax culture, and drive voluntary compliance. So this morning, joining me from Lagos, Nigeria, I have Taiwo Oyedele, Chairman, Presidential Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms Committee. It's nice to have you join us on Business Edge. Hello, Taiwo, can you hear me?
Thank you and good morning.
All right, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, you are chairing this committee, and part of the objective is to enhance revenue collection efficiency. Now, in your opinion, what is Nigeria's biggest taxation challenge? Is it the laws that have been amended over and over again? Is it the lack of clear-cut direction? Or does it have to do with implementation that has been daunting or institutional circumvention of tax rules and obligations? I'd like to know.
Yeah, it's a combination of challenges and different factors and issues, including having a very clear and consistent direction for the fiscal system. We have a national tax policy that was introduced in 2017, and some efforts have been made in trying to implement that policy, but that hasn't been enough. And even if you implemented it 100% as of today, you would imagine that the policy that was put in place about 6 years ago is now even due for a review. So you have an issue with the fiscal policy direction. The other aspect of it, you mentioned already, is the laws. So many of the tax laws that we operate today were inherited from our colonial masters before independence in 1960. The Stamp Duty Act, for example, is the law of 1939, before the internet was invented. So what that means is, despite the changes we have introduced through the Finance Act over the past 4 to 5 years, that also means that it's time for you to take a step back and say, should you be rewriting the tax laws instead of trying to amend them every time, which in a way also creates some sort of uncertainties for businesses. And then the other part is the administration. We need to do better. Some progress have been made, particularly at the federal level and some states in Nigeria, but that cannot be said for a number of states and more so the local government level of government. So altogether, we want to be able to look at the policy aspect. We want to be able to look at the laws. We also want to be able to look at administration. And beyond that, the fiscal governance about, respecting the threshold from the Fiscal Responsibility Act, ensuring prudence and discipline in how we spend our money, and also rationalizing incentives. As well as coordination with other, policy authorities, particularly monetary, both within the federal government and across subnational levels.
All right, so talking about prudence and discipline when it comes to fiscal management now, that is another area because, of course, we talk about accountability, which is also a part of government that is lacking, as some have put it. We can also talk about infrastructural deficit and the general feeling that taxpayers' money are not being expended well and being cornered by some people, leading to public distrust. So when we have issues like this, institutional issues like this, I'd like to know, has the government done enough in the area of transparency to end public trust?
Yeah, so there's still a lot to do when it comes to accountability and transparency. And in one of the projects that I had the opportunity to lead at the Nigerian Economy Summit Group was on taxpayers' tax perception and tax morale. And then what we found out is Nigerians generally don't think there's anything wrong with evading their taxes because they do not trust government. And one of the reasons why they do not trust government is the lack of transparency or not sufficient accountability for taxpayers' money, in addition to not finding sufficient fiscal exchange for the taxes that they have paid. So overall, for you to be able to build a system where there is trust between the people and the government, which is at the heart of the social contract, there's a need for more transparency, there's a need for proper accountability, and that has to be sustained. It's not something you do 1 year, you get the applause, and then you default back to what you have been doing before. It has to be sustained with continuous engagement with the people, not only to tell them what you are doing with the taxpayers' money, but also get the feedback from them in terms of what else they think should be your priority. Sometimes even when the money is not wasted, you find that the priority of projects are not the ones that impact the people the most, particularly in a country where you have multidimensional poverty, with about 60-something% of the population living within that threshold. You would then imagine that what's of utmost priority to the majority of our people who are vulnerable, at the bottom of the ladder, are those basic things around, clean drinking water, healthcare, education, basic, healthcare and education, roads from farm to town, and so on and so forth. So these are part of the things we hope to be able to look at and then advise the policymakers on what we think they should be doing, and then support them with the implementation as part of the mandates of the committee.
All right. Well, we know that when you talk about poverty index, there are other areas attached to it. You talk about the cost of living, rising inflation, and now the Nigerians are even currently grappling with the rising prices. We still have a government that is hoping or aiming to achieve an 18% tax to GDP ratio. Now, how will that be achieved with all these negative indices that we are recording? Because we notice that these negative figures or negative feelings in the economy are actually hurting businesses and individuals, and of course their spendings are also being affected. So how do you achieve 18% in GDP, in ratio to GDP, when we have these negative records in terms of the economy?
Yes, good question. So the whole idea for this committee is not to just raise revenue. It is to also help in terms of facilitating economic growth and competitiveness. So that's one of the three pillars of the work of our committee. So what that means is, in the short, medium, and long term, we're going to be looking at what are those interventions that are needed to make it easier for you to do business, to make businesses competitive, and to make them thrive, including, for example, what should we be doing from a fiscal policy and tax reform point of view to make it easier for you to export, to make it easier for you if you import things to clear them and get out of the port, and also to turn Nigeria to a location for research and development, innovation, headquarters location, particularly for Africa, as well as even other important issues like shared services, center. So those ideas are things we're going to be looking at. So in other words, the 18% tax to GDP ratio is not expected to happen immediately. That's a journey of the next 3 years, as given to us by the president. And where will the money come from? When we said we're not going to introduce new taxes, in fact, we're going to repeal many of the existing taxes and keep the numbers to a very few, maybe even a single digit, broad base, easy to collect, and easy to administer, right? High revenue yielding. So where we think that the money will come from, number one, the tax gap. So currently you have many people who are not compliant. Some of them are in the tax net, but they're not fully disclosing their income for tax purposes. So that gap, we estimate, is in the region of about 20 trillion naira. And then you have high cost of collection, which, if you bring it down to international levels, will give more money to the treasury. And you also have incentives. Some of them were introduced, far back 40 years ago. So we're going to be looking at them from a cost-benefit point of view to say, do we still really need them? And then that process of rationalizing incentives will give you two advantages. One, you have more money coming into government. And two, you may then succeed in removing incentives that are distortive to economic activities, and therefore you stimulate economic growth in the process. So these are some of the areas where we believe, that we can raise the GDP tax to GDP ratio from currently around 10.86% as of 2021 to about 18% in the next 3 years, which would then be in line with the African average. The African average is 16%. But if you exclude Nigeria and you recalculate, then that average is about 18%. So it's really about getting Nigeria to the African average. And we think that is feasible and it's a reasonable target.
All right, you said a couple of things that you are hoping to achieve, but then we see that with this new committee, Nigerians are actually hoping for a lot. But then what is the benchmark? You've itemized things that would be achieved by this committee, but then how would you go about achieving them? Because when you say 3 years, Nigerians might not have patience for 3 years. I know a lot of businesses, some have collapsed, some have shut down, some are struggling to continue to pay, to continue to run their operation. And as it is, we have so many people who are within that informal and formal bracket who would have to deal with the consequences. And who knows, so many small and medium enterprises might not be able to live on or beyond that 3 years. So what is the respite for them?
Yeah, very good question. So the 3 years timeline is the target for our tax to GDP ratio to grow from the current 10.86 to around 18%. In terms of the intervention, the lifespan of the committee is actually 1 year. That 1 year is divided into 3 phases. Phase 1 is within the first 30 days, and we call them the quick wins. So this is when we quickly come up with what is it that we can do to help support small businesses so they don't go under. How do we support vulnerable individuals and households? That's the first 30 days. Then the next phase is 6 months. So 6 months is for critical tax reforms. So where we hope to be able to review the tax laws, repeal the suboptimal ones, enact new taxes to replace the major taxes, so that when we are done, we have clean, simple, easy to read and understand few number of taxes, and possibly even interpret them into the different local languages. Then you have 12 months, which is for implementation. So both the 30 days, the 6 months, as well as the 1 year will run concurrently. So we're not asking Nigerians to wait for 3 years before they start seeing the impact of our work. We hope that that impact can begin to come on board even as early as the first 30 days.
All right, so does that mean that this committee actually has the power to begin to implement its recommendations, or you would have to forward the recommendations to the president to get ratification before you can begin to implement them?
Yeah, the power to implement, because that power, lies with the relevant arms and organs of government. For example, if we come up with a recommendation that we need to repeal the Personal Income Tax Act and enact a new one, right? So then not only do you need the president and the executive arm to agree with you, you also need the subnational, because personal income tax cuts across states. So you need to then engage with the governors under their platform, either the Governors Forum and the National Economic Council. Once you get their buy-in, you also need the National Assembly that will pass the law. So the mandate of our committee is to come up with recommendations and then support the implementation. So we will not say to government, go and write a new law. We'll say, government, we think we need a new law. Do you agree with us? Government says yes. We actually draft that law for them and then go through the stakeholder engagement. One of your questions is, how do we want to do it? We're going to have extensive consultation with our stakeholders, the Nigerian people across different groups, including people living with disabilities, Nigerians in the diaspora, traders and the informal sector, multinationals, even government officers and tax authorities. We're going to be having this engagement with them to get input from them, to share our thoughts with them, and to provide feedback to them as well, so that we co-create the solutions to our fiscal challenges and then begin to have a different trajectory for our economy.
It's quite nice to see that the plan or the role that the committee will be playing will be robust in this regard. But then I suppose that this committee will be looking also into the issue of fragmented revenue reporting procedures and the collection of revenue by, so to speak, untrained personnel, most especially at the local level. So what will you be doing in terms of solution proffering to ensure that these reforms trickle down to the local level of governance?
Yes, while I don't want to preempt the work of the committee, I can tell you clearly this is an area of focus for us based on the mandate of the committee. And we're going to be looking at all, possible solutions. On top of that list will be, how do you use technology and payment system? So if you first simplify and harmonize the taxes that we need to pay, you create threshold to exempt poor and vulnerable people, and those people that are left that need to pay, you make it easier for them to pay. So maybe USSD is what I should do to make a payment, even if I live in a village, rather than having to go to tax office or use some individuals who mount roadblocks and then they harass people, intimidate them. Sometimes I'll say they stop them because they may not even be operating anything that is supported by the law. So we want to be able to get to a point where all of that will be a thing of the past, and the way we assess, impose, and collect taxes will be very decent, like you find in many countries. If you pay, via USSD on your phone, you then get the receipt automatically by way of a message, also on your phone. If you lose that message, you can also then put in something, and then the receipt comes back to you. So whenever you need to present that as your evidence of tax payment, you can present it and have a free pass. If you are transporting goods from point A to point B, sometimes that could be across many states. What happens at the moment is almost every local government stops you and they collect their levy. By the time you get to your destination, the prices of the goods have to go up significantly, including food items. But if you have a system that is harmonized, relies on technology and payment system, that will be a thing of the past. And we begin to see the impact not only on the revenue of government going up, but the people will be paying less and prices of goods and services will then hopefully be moderated.
All right, thank you so much, Taiwo. Of course, it's important not for the government to just come up with policies, but then be able to carry the people along in terms of education and intimating them with the guidelines and the rules and the processes that involves this new era of tax administration that's coming into Nigeria. And we'll have them tag along so that they also can benefit even as they continue with being obligated to supporting the government in the economic drive that everyone is hoping to see. But then Taiwo Oyedele, Chairman, Presidential Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms Committee, and thank you so much for joining the show.